in the last few videos. And you'll notice here, this part of it, the part under the square root, b squared minus 4ac, is in blue. Now this part has a special significance. It's called the discriminant. And it's because this part tells us what kind of solutions we're going to get for x. And that is because it's under the square root. And we know if we take a square root of a positive number, we're going to get a real number. Now this plus minus here, see, we're going to get negative b plus or minus a real number. So there will end up being two real solutions for x. So if this part under the square root b squared minus 4ac equals a positive number, then we will end up getting two real solutions for x. If it's a negative number under the square root, then the square root of a negative number is an imaginary number. So we'll have negative b plus or minus an imaginary number, in which case we'll get two imaginary solutions. So if b squared minus 4ac equals a negative number, the square root of the negative number will give us an imaginary number, plus or minus an imaginary number means we will have two imaginary solutions for x. So just by telling whether this discriminant is positive or negative, we can determine the type of solutions we're going to get for x. Now this might not seem very important right now, but when we start graphing these quadratic equations, it's actually going to tell us quite a bit of useful information. So let's look at a quadratic equation like this, and just by solving for b squared minus 4ac, we can determine whether we're going to get real solutions or imaginary solutions. So b squared minus 4ac, here we're going to get 9 squared minus 4 times 2 times 3, which will be 81 minus 24. And we don't even have to finish solving this. We can clearly see that 81 is bigger than 24. So this is going to be a positive number. The discriminant is positive. And when the discriminant is positive, we have two real solutions. So what about something if we have a negative here? What will the discriminant be now? The discriminant will be negative 10 squared minus 4 times 4 times 5. And this is going to be 100 minus 80. And once again, we're going to get a positive number for the discriminant, which means we have two real solutions. So don't let that negative there fool you. When you square the negative 10, it becomes a positive number again. For this one, the discriminant will be 7 squared minus 4 times 5 times 4. This is going to be 49 minus 4 times 5 is 20 times 4 is 60. And looks like we're going to get a negative number now. So even though all of these were positive, the discriminant is actually negative, which means we don't have any real solutions here. The two solutions here are imaginary numbers with I. So remember, it has nothing to do with positives or negatives in the problem. Here, the reason we got a negative discriminant was because this 7 squared was less than the 4 times the 5 times the 4. So if you have a negative in front of x squared, remember if you're factoring or completing the square, you're going to end up factoring that negative out somewhere. Not necessarily if you're doing the quadratic formula. If we're using the discriminant, it's the same. You don't have to factor out this negative. We can just treat a as negative 6. That's fine. So b squared is going to be 18 squared minus 4 times negative 6 times negative 13. Now here it gets a little trickier because you have a lot of negatives here. But we're going to have 18 squared. If you don't want to solve that yet, we can just leave it like that. Now here we have, let's count the negatives. 1, 2, 3 negatives. So that's negative times negative is positive, times negative will bring it back to negative. So this is going to be minus 4 times 6 times 13. We're going to have 24 times 13. Actually, we're probably going to end up having to solve this. So let's just do that now. The 18 squared, do a little bit of long multiplication over here. Okay, so that's going to be 324 minus, this is 24 times 13. And we'll just solve that real quick. And that's going to be 312. So 324 minus 312 is going to be a positive 12. So the discriminant is positive, which means we have 2 real solutions. Yeah, that one I actually didn't realize these numbers were going to be so high. Normally I don't think you'll have to do any long multiplication. Or of course if you have a calculator you can just punch it in there. But again, if we're trying to determine real or imaginary solutions, this was still faster than having to actually solve this problem and get the actual solutions for x. We can easily tell that they're going to be real solutions just by finding the discriminant. Okay, now we're going to look at something that might give us something a little strange for a result. The discriminant is going to be here 3 squared minus 4 times 2 times 9 over 8 is our C. So let's see what this is. This is going to be 9 minus 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 9 over 8 is just going to be 9, because the times 8 and the divide by 8 will cancel out. So we have 9 minus 9, which is 0. Now, we haven't seen that yet. What happens if the discriminant is 0? Well, let's go back and look at the quadratic formula. If b squared minus 4ac is 0, then we have the square root of 0, which is, of course, 0. And then we'll have negative b plus or minus 0. Well, adding 0 and subtracting 0 both do the same thing, which is they do nothing. So even though we have a plus minus, we really only have one solution, because adding 0 or subtracting 0 will be the same thing. So if the discriminant equals 0, then we're just going to have one solution, and 0 is obviously a real number, so it's going to be one real solution. So back to this problem over here, the discriminant of this equation was 0, so we will have one real solution here. And I believe we might have seen a couple of quadratic equations in the past where instead of having 2 solutions like normal, there was only one solution. And the reason for that was because the discriminant was equal to 0. B squared minus 4ac was 0. Okay, let's just do one more. B squared minus 4ac equals negative 4 squared. Remember to square the negative as well. Minus 4 times 6 times 1. This is 16 minus 24, which is negative 8. A negative discriminant means we have two imaginary solutions. Okay, and that is the discriminant. If it is a positive number, you have two real solutions. If it's a negative number, you have two imaginary solutions. And if it equals 0, there is one real solution. So good to memorize that and understand why that works. And that is definitely going to help us out with graphing, which I believe we are going to do next.